Hey everybody, Mr. Marie here, working on it Wednesday. We're going to do a little bit of basic maintenance on our metal lathes in the shop here. So commonly in a machine shop setting like this, we need to oil these lathes up. There are several oilers on the lathe. There's also a grease fitting we have to hit, and also some general cleaning things that we like to take care of just to maintain these machines. These lathes are roughly 42 years old, 43 years old, and parts are starting to get expensive, so the best way to try and prolong the life of these things is to maintain them. I plan to work here another 23 years or so. It's 2021, so I don't plan on getting rid of these lathes. The quality of the newer machines that are coming out is not built to the same quality this is. So for me, in my opinion, it's better off to keep this, hang on to it, and move forward from there. So with that being said, the first thing we want to do is oil this machine up. There are several little oilers we're going to hit. The first thing we want to do is check our hydraulic oil. So as you folks know, these lathes have a variable speed control, which is right here. Now, this little cup, okay, that's an oiler cup, okay, supplies this with oil. Down below the lathe, there is a set of belts underneath the lower cover. We'll pop that off quick so you can see what that looks like. There's a hydraulic unit. Now these leak down a little bit. These hydraulics leak. So with the hydraulic leaking a little bit, I have all the packing to do it. That'll be another working on it Wednesday. This loses the ability to change speed. So if I was to turn the lathe on, oh, no power. Hold on one second. So if I turn the power on, okay, normally what I would be able to do is take and turn this thing up. Okay, right now we're not getting much, so we need to reset this, and that takes a little bit of oil. Now the type of oil we use for this operation is a hydraulic type of oil. It's not just a lubricating oil, it's hydraulic. So in order to do that, we need our hydraulic oil first. I keep this can specifically in the fire cabinet by my office. This has a specific hydraulic oil in it. So we will lift up the tab, and you can see the window on the side of here. I'm going to hold back on the variable speed control. Okay, it's going to pull the oil down into that cylinder, and I need to top it off with this. So as it's running, you can't see it from the camera view, but that oil level is dropping a little bit. As it drops, we're going to take and put a couple little squirts in this hydraulic oil. We don't want to overfill it because that just makes a mess. Okay. We'll continue to do that, and then we'll also run our variable speed back and forth. So we'll increase our speed a little bit. You can hear that line. And we'll turn it back again. Put another little squirt in there to top it off. Okay, and that one's in good shape now. That variable speed control has the full ability to turn, and we can also use that variable speed. Okay, you have to have the machine running when you go to turn this variable speed control. The motor's not turning, it's not going to actuate the hydraulic underneath the bottom cover here, so you have to have that on anytime you go to move it. Okay? So, the next part, we are going to hit the oilers inside the lathe. And what an oiler is basically, think of a device that looks like this with a ball bearing or a BB sticking up on top of it. I'm going to take my oil can, I'm going to push down on the BB, which is spring fed. Okay, push down on it, it's going to seal around there. I'm going to pump the trigger a few times, and it's going to push the oil through. This is the type of oil can that we're going to use to lubricate those oilers. If you look at the very end of this, it's a very small hole that comes out of there. And that, like I said, that round area seals against the oiler. And actually, I'll show you what one looks like. I got an oiler sitting right here. A couple of these. Here's what an oiler looks like. And as I talked about that BB, so here's an oiler, here's the BB. When I push this down, okay, it lets the oil go in, but it keeps all the junk from going inside of there. So that's part of the reason why they use oilers. The metal shavings can't get down inside of here, and you can see on the back side of the oiler, that's where the oil comes out. So we push down with our grease, our oil can. Okay, we hit this ball bearing, it pushes through, and then we can oil it. There are several on this machine. The first one is right up on top of here. There's a cap. So we simply take a flathead screwdriver, we pop that cap off, and you're not going to be able to see down inside of this one. This one sits on the inside of the spindle. We'll rotate until we see our oiler pop up. Okay, and we're going to take our gun. It goes down inside on top of that oiler. A couple squirts. I usually do 2 per. There we go. Had to get the grease moving first. I usually do 2 pumps per oiler, and that's plenty enough. And that cap goes back on to keep the dirt and stuff out of there. Okay, there's a couple more down here on the bottom of the spindle. This will go down low enough. Okay, there's one on the come on, there we go. Okay, there's one on the inside of the lead screw. Okay, so a couple pumps there. And sometimes the grease will come back at you, so I don't like to stand directly in front of it in case it decides to squirt back. Okay, our slide gear has an oiler, so we're gonna put this against here. Let's see if we can angle our camera down a little bit more. Okay, oiler, can against the oiler, couple pumps. This one usually squirts back at me. I'll usually step to the side. You'll see it dripping a little bit. Most of the oil goes in, but some of it does come back out. Okay, we're now going to come around to the front of our lathe here. And there are several on the headstock of the lathe. Sorry about that. Okay, we have 2 on the gear set. So we'll hit these guys first. 2 pumps. We also have one on the inside of our gearbox. 2 pumps. Okay, moving right along. I like to try moving a line so I get them all. There's one, another one inside the gearbox here. We have to pop this cover off. And this one's down on an angle. If you've never, you won't be able to see it unless you pull the side off. Okay, 2 pumps on that one. Moving right along, you are going to see a handful of these on the carriage of the lathe. And people sometimes complain. They say, Mr. Marie, this lathe's all greasy. Well, I don't want to touch it. It's covered in grease and oil. And that's for a reason. So let's line this up. There is one on the top of the carriage hand wheel. Okay, there's one on the center of the carriage that moves us left and right. Okay, we have another oiler. If we look on the top of our compound rest, we have a small oiler. We have another oiler on our cross slide. We have oilers on our carriage, and we're going to do something different. There's an oiler on the front and back of each side of this. Okay, what I normally do, we can put a couple pumps in these. I normally take and actually I oil right on the ways of the lathe. You'll see what that looks like in a minute. So we'll just do one of these ones here. We'll get the rest in a minute. Okay, we have an oiler on our tailstock. Okay, so it's above this hand wheel. And our last oiler on this side, if we can see it, if you can see it, is where the lead screw actually fastens to the front of the lathe, to the ways of the lathe. So I'm going to let that go. I'm going to give it a couple pumps here. Okay, once I oil everything, what I like to do is turn it on, and I like to make all the movements in it. So we're going to fire this puppy up, make sure we are safe, everything's where it needs to be at. Piece of material's loose, we don't need that flying at us. Turn our lathe on, I like to pick the clutch up, let that spin, let that oil circulate. Now I also just oiled my compound rest, my cross feed, and my carriage. I would take and run those back and forth to circulate that oil around. So I can go full extents on those. We'll shut this back off so I don't have to listen to that whine. So making these movements is obviously helpful, keeps everything in good shape. So that takes care of what we're going to do with our oilers. The next thing we want to do is oil down these ways. So what I use for that, I normally take a piece of paper towel and I will take some of this oil, I'll place it on the paper towel, and I'll just smear it on the actual ways of the lathe. Okay, wipe it down like this, and that gives it a nice nice coat of oil. I mean, if I wanted to, I could just take and hose the oil on here like this. That's acceptable also. Okay, we want to definitely keep these things oiled up. As the moisture starts to change and the humidity starts to change in our building, you will notice that these lathes and things start to rust. Any bare exposed metal will start to get a little corrosion to it. So I like to keep everything oiled up and moving smooth. Put a little extra up here. This is where most of the work gets done on the lathe, so I like to keep this area slathered up here, if you will. Now I've been kind of switching back to using some WD-40 and some products like that. I could take a little WD and hose it on. What I normally do is dust it with a WD-40. I'll take the chuck, give this a real light spin by hand. And I like to let that sit for a little bit. I'll then go back with my paper towel. That way when you go to turn the lathe on, you can spray with oil. But these parts need oil just as well. So just like cleaning or maintaining anything else, I go through and do this process all the time. Every piece of equipment in here has a list of tasks and cleaning operations you have to do to it to maintain it. So I do them. You don't know I do them, but I do them on my time. But I like to have a shop that's running with no issues on equipment. I like things to be running and not broke down. So this doesn't get used too often, but our taper attachment in the back, I usually just do a little WD-40 on that. Set slides. Slide it the opposite direction, make sure we get everything. There's one more oiler in the center here I didn't get. We'll hit this guy real fast. Another one of those. That's pretty much it for the oiling operations. Sometimes I'll even take my tailstock. I will slide out my tailstock ram a couple times a year because it normally sits inside the tailstock. I'll take and we'll dust a little WD-40 on this also. And I usually put WD-40 on all the handles and everything. That's why everything's usually covered in oil when you come over here. But like I said, as your fingers touch it with the oils in your hands, this stuff starts to rust as the humidity changes in the building. So it's going up to almost 70 today, so that humidity is starting to come back. So that's why I'm going to go through and do this today. We'll hit all the lathes. Okay, there's one last thing to do in here. There's a grease fitting underneath the cabinet of the lathe. I need to grab a socket and a couple other tools. I'm going to grab those tools and we'll meet you back. We're going to reset this so you can see a little bit lower where I'm at, and we'll get that task done also. Okay, in the lower portion of our closet and lathe here, we have to take this cover off, and this is actually where the clutches are for our lathe. We're going to take these 4 flathead screws out of here first, out of this vent. try not to lose those so we're not on the manhunt later on for them. Okay, so move this over a little bit for you folks. And we'll come down a little bit also. A little bit more maybe. There we go. Fight with the tripod, sorry about that. Okay, so we're inside of our lathe now. There is a grease fitting on the inside of the clutch. On the end, there's a bearing here. Okay, and this has to be greased. We can't skip that. I don't know if you can see in the camera right where my finger is. There's a grease fitting there. If we lose that bearing, you know, we're probably into a day's work to rip all this apart. So it's easier just to grease it and keep it maintained. So we're gonna get our grease gun. Okay, get our fitting on. And I like to load this one up. I like to give it about 4 or 5 pumps. Okay. I don't care if there's extra grease on there, but this is, you know, very expensive part of the lathe. So we have our grease fitting now greased. That is complete. You'll see me calmly walking around. I'm covered in grease and oil, grease stains on my pants, shirt, whatever. It's because I maintain this equipment. There's really sometimes no way to stay clean when doing this stuff. It's just the nature of the beast. So we have that grease fitting hit. We'll put our cover back on. And we'll check the belts on this also. We'll check the belts for wear. Okay, those are started. And we'll snug these up. It's kind of crazy on these lathes. There is no directions. I have a parts manual. I have a parts breakdown. And that's all they give you for equipment like this. I don't have directions per se. There's a little maintenance paperwork on it, but that's about it. So we'll take our side cover off. We'll inspect these belts real quick, and then we should be just about done here for today. So on the side of the machine, there's a bolt here. There's a bolt on the opposite side. We're going to take those off first. Oh, this one's loose on the back. Takes a 9/16 socket. And these bolts stay suspended in a case. They don't go anywhere. They don't totally come out. So usually once we can get them loose by hand, we take and pop this cover. And here's our set of belts. The first belt up on top is called a timing belt. And it's actually geared. I'm going to grab the iPad and come around the side. There is a gear on the inside of here, and these cogs, or these chunks in the belt, line up with that like teeth. Okay? That timing belt's about 400 bucks. The second belt down below is my variable speed belt. That's what turns the motor. That goes from the motor to the spindle. So the motor is down here at the bottom. This variable speed moves in and out. That's the hydraulic part I was talking about that sometimes leaks down, which if I run my finger across the bottom, you can see the oil. I have some packing nuts to change in here, so that'll be another task here down the road. So motors here, this is our variable speed belt. This turns this flywheel where our clutch is. When you engage the clutch in and out, this moves back and forth and it engages the cogged belt, and that's what turns the spindle. Okay, so belts look okay. There's no cracks, no nothing suspect right there. So that's something else we want to check. I like to keep a separate set of belts on the shelf just in case one breaks. We're not down for a long period of time. So We'll take and put our bolts back in here. And we'll call this job done. Okay, folks, that is Working on It Wednesday on a Clausing 5900 series lathe. So we basically hit all the oilers, grease fittings, check the belts, and that's about it. Oh, two more things to check. Give me 1 second. Last two items to check, and not that I forgot these, but when I was down low, I looked right up and I saw them. There is a sight glass underneath the headstock of the lathe, and you really can't see it. There's an oil level mark and a line. Okay, that provides lubrication to the headstock. There's also one on the carriage. This one's a little bit easier to see. It says oil level, and it's right to the line in the sight glass. So, last two things to check, and there's our lathe, serviced and ready to rock and roll.